there's this brilliant American monologuist, a guy called Mike Daisey. Has anyone heard of Mike Daisey? Maybe not. Probably not so popular here, but I really recommend him. So he's amazing. He gives these really compelling talks. Tells these stories. Has the audience crying and laughing and thinking. And today you've got me instead. But the reason I'm talking about him is the inspiration for this talk actually came from a show of his that I went to quite a few years ago. And let's see if I can get this. He had a show in our local theater in Berkeley in California called 21 Dog Years Doing Time at Amazon.com. So this was a story of how he had spent time in this early West Coast startup. It was very early days of Amazon, selling his soul for a few stock options in a West Coast technology company. So, of course, that bit didn't relate to me at all. But one scene that I did like from it that I took away, and I was there with my friend Alex, and and he talked about how during his darkest times he would go down to the local Starbucks, and he and his wife would order a vanilla latte, and they'd sit opposite each other at a table, and they'd sit there and they'd sip their vanilla latte, and they'd look at each other and they'd say, "We're doing all right, aren't we?" And so that has stuck with me quite a lot, and we'll come back to that. They say that 7 dog years is 1 human year, and so hence the title of his talk, and hence the title of this, because if I look back, I've actually been in the cloud native world and in the cloud native community now going back 8 human years, so 56 dog years, and it certainly feels like 1 year is 7 normal years when you're in cloud native and the way it's going, because time really flies in this space. Let's go back even before I got into cloud native. What I would say is the foundational project of cloud native, the cloud native era, really was Docker, and it really started with the launch of Docker in 2013. And CoreOS came shortly after that. Even though DevOps had been around for a while, this is really like containers were what opened up this revolution. And when you look back, kind of from the vantage point we have now, it feels like this was an inevitable progression. Containers were obvious. Who wouldn't have embraced that revolution that Docker brought into the market? But actually, if you look at what people were saying at the time, the people that really knew about this thing, I love this quote that someone commented on Hacker News. So this is from someone that's really, you read this is someone that understands Linux, they understand the technology here. This is an expert looking at what is Docker really doing here. What is really interesting is the amount of hype that Docker created. There's no fundamentally new ideas or technical advances here. That's just a bunch of well-written web pages full of buzzwords, right? This Docker thing, there's nothing to it, right? And of course, now we look back at that and we laugh because it launched this huge technology revolution. So what is it that this expert didn't see that we now think is obvious? And I'm going to put it to you that Docker was not an invention. So his criticism was, this isn't a new invention. No, there was nothing new in Docker, right? Technologically, everything was there at the point that Docker was created. What Docker did was innovation. They took a set of technologies that had kind of come available at about the same time, some ideas, they executed really well. They listened to what the customers, what the users were needing. They really understood the developer experience. And they wrapped this up and they brought it to market and they built a community around it. And I think that's an important lesson when we're thinking about what comes next and we're thinking about what causes revolutions within this space. Like, what is cloud native about? How did it happen? How did it come about? I think it's often not about some genius idea. It's about the bringing together, the happy coincidence of multiple new technologies coming together and at just the right time for the market need. But what's all that got to do with me, right? What I'm talking about there is something that happened just before I got into the cloud native community. What was I doing at that time? Where does my kind of 0 dog year start? I was working at a telco company, so I wasn't really in the enterprise cloud native space at all. We did voice over IP switches and network protocols and things like this. So I was based in this office in San Francisco, which I just built out, and we've moved into, and looking for, where's the next innovation going to come from within our company? So just to kind of situate you at this point, what was big and looked like the huge opportunity was OpenStack. Everyone was building around OpenStack. And then there was this thing called software-defined networking. A company called Nicira had just invented some SDN technology, sold to VMware for over $1 billion. So clearly there was something in this. And we internally had some networking technologies, so we were really interested to go explore this space. And Nicira, actually what they had done was they'd invented this virtual switch which got baked into OpenStack essentially as the networking model for how OpenStack would connect virtual machines within a cluster. So, and this worked, and it has a lot of really advanced features, but it was pretty fragile. And it was about this time I was actually introduced to this guy who was a networking genius. I mean, this guy knew networking in and out. He was one of the earliest people that had built the internet, really. I think at one point he was at MCI and controlled like a third of the internet himself. So, I mean, he built everything from the ground up. So this was someone called Christopher Lilienstolpe, and he came to us from Big Switch, one of the SDN startups, and he'd had a lot of experience building OpenStack-based solutions, and even this guy who understood networking inside out, struggled with the virtual networking within OpenStack. And it kind of came to a head when he spent a whole weekend trying to debug some virtual networking problem and ended up just like tearing the entire cluster down and having to rebuild it because he just couldn't fix the state of this virtual network. And he felt there has to be a better way to do this. And he started from the thought that, well, the internet scales. We have hosts come and go on the internet all the time, scales to millions of endpoints. Can't we just build virtual networks like we build the internet? So that was when we had the idea, or that was where the idea came from for Project Calico, which, the idea was get rid of all of this complexity that had been built into software-defined networking, radically simplify it, take it just down to basic IP networking, totally simple. And this, in fact, is Christopher out taking word of this great new invention, Calico, that we had out to OpenStack Summit, trying to convince people how wonderful it was. And probably, my guess is, most of you know of Calico. Actually, show of hands, who has heard of Calico? Okay, pretty much everyone in the room. So, in the cloud-native space, Calico is well known today. So you might look back and think, well, that idea was pretty obvious, kind of like the idea of Docker was pretty obvious, right? So you can guess what kind of reactions we used to get. This was the typical reaction when we went to somewhere like OpenStack Summit and explained what Calico did. Are you crazy? This can never work. And even if it did work, you can't just expect to advertise a few routes with BGP and like that's it. It can't be that simple. Like that's cheating almost, right? So that was the kind of reaction we got. If you don't believe me, and people publish this stuff, right? And again, like that Hacker News article that you saw, This is written by someone who's an expert in the space. Ivan Pepelnjak is like world-renowned networking expert. Still is. He's smart. I would never want to go up in a room against him and like test my networking knowledge against his. But still, he writes a whole article saying, Calico, it'll never work. If you could make it work, you'd have to add all of these bells and whistles. And by the time you've done that, you've ended up reinventing this thing that Juniper's already built. So maybe another show of hands, who has deployed Contrail in a cloud-native environment? One. Okay, so, that tells you something, right? So we actually were onto something, but the smartest guy in the room couldn't see past his view of the world to see what we were doing and how that radical simplification was what the world needed at that point in time. And so there's a lesson I take from this, which hopefully inspires all of you entrepreneurs, all you people who've got new ideas. Someone smart telling you that your idea sucks is actually, or can be, a really good positive signal, because it can be a signal that you're disrupting something that is just the accepted status quo that needs disrupting. It could just be your idea sucks, but that's it's definitely for me part of why we were so excited about Calico was because we had this group of people that told us we were crazy, but we also had another set of people that told us this was exactly what they've been looking for. Now they finally saw the light and saw how they could get into containers or get into virtualization or whatever. Folks like Bloomberg, who'd been operating OpenStack at scale and knew all the problems, were like, yeah, that is what we need. So this kind of polarization and rejection was a really good experience and something that I think is an interesting aspect of early innovations. But it wasn't just this rejection or just anything to do with this idea. There's a lot of luck involved, and the luck is often around timing. And of course, when I say luck, you make your own luck as well. But think about what time this is. So this is about the time I'm being born as a cloud native, my first getting into this world with Kubernetes and containers. And we launched Calico in July 2014, and it was only a month after Eric Brewer had announced Kubernetes at DockerCon that summer. And it was a year away from Kubernetes 1.0. So there was this window in which the networking model for Kubernetes was going to get defined. And Google had defined a networking model which worked great on Google Cloud and didn't work anywhere else. But the basic premise of the kind of the plug-in interface that Kubernetes had worked great with Calico. It was IP-based, didn't assume any of this virtual switching complexity that they had in OpenStack. So this is another kind of lesson here is timing is everything. Don't underestimate this, the role that serendipity plays in innovation. This is another case as well where what's obvious today, like we look back and say, oh yeah, Kubernetes, of course, that was going to be the big thing, and the timing was great, and you just plugged in there. It wasn't at all obvious at the time. The world is much noisier than it looks in retrospect, right? We had, Mesos was getting large user deployments. Folks like Apple had built iCloud on Mesos, and we're talking about that. You had OpenStack, which still had a lot of momentum, a whole bunch of other orchestrators, and Kubernetes was very early and pretty fragile and very basic. So we fretted a lot about where do we focus resources, but in retrospect, this was it was this tight confluence of things coming together at the right time that really enabled it to take off. Another thing that was really important to us was community. And one of the things that I felt coming into the cloud native community, which have been, in the early days, it was folks like Kelsey Hightower, folks like Sarah Novotny, Brendan Burden, so, folks you see here, who were, really put a lot of energy into making the Kubernetes community a very, very open and welcoming and diverse one. And we just felt at home there. It felt like, and this is, we were talking about this over dinner last night. This is probably very unfair to look at this in retrospect, because the timing was very different in terms of where the projects were developed, where the project development was at that point. But OpenStack, to me, felt very much like a small number of big companies that were basically trying to build revenue-generating products. And the cloud-native community around Docker and CoreOS and Kubernetes felt like a bunch of developers and DevOps folks who were trying to put together technologies to solve real everyday problems that they actually had in a collaborative way. So I think this is an important thing for you to take away from this as well, is the value of this community. It's why I love coming to Container Days as well, because I feel that we still have that here. And it shows that how important it is to build that, and for us to continue building that and not lose sight of it, even as Kubernetes becomes this multi-billion-dollar industry. Yes, there's big money, big corporate interests in it. I have a Microsoft shirt on, but the community is still what makes this a special place to be, and what gets me excited about getting up in the morning, coming to work in this area. So what's happening about this time? So it's now about late 2015, early 2016. There's this rocket ship that's Kubernetes. It's obviously taking off. We have this project Calico within this company, telco company, Metaswitch, remember? And it's obvious that it's going to be very hard for us to take this to market. If you remember, innovation, it's more than just having an invention. It's more than just having a smart idea. It's the execution of how do you put it together with partnerships, go to market, build the community around it, all of that. And we saw well-funded startups raising a lot of capital to go do that. So we felt we had to go do that. So having the funding behind you to go build is an important aspect of innovating and how you actually execute. So we did that. So that's me on stage at CoreOS Fest in Berlin. So we announced Tigera, the company, to take Calico to market here in Germany. Just happened to be that CoreOS Fest was there that year. So yeah, I'm about 14 dog years old at that point. Another 14 dog years later, at my first Container Days, this is me here at the Container Days over by the harbor, and really living the Silicon Valley dream at that point, right? We got that startup, we were taking it to market, we were driving growth, we were hiring engineers like crazy, raised a Series B, partnered with all the major players, got Calico in all of the major cloud, Kubernetes offerings, working really long days, really long weekends, several years of this, becomes pretty tight. Becomes pretty tiring, and so it's vanilla latte time. My wife and I, down at our local Pete's coffee shop in Berkeley, we're looking at each other across the table, and we tell each other, we're doing all right, aren't we? We were doing all right. Well, yeah, we were doing all right. Life was good. We're in California, but our kids, my eldest kid was getting up to being about 112 dog years old at that point, which, of those of you who can do the math, means they were getting close to finishing high school. But we were a European family. My wife's German, I'm English. We wanted to come and spend time in Europe as a family. And, the whole startup thing was kind of getting to a bit of burnout point. And, this is where that community comes in. And one of the things that I had felt through the various events and getting to know people, and really getting to know people pretty well, was I knew that there were people out there that I could call and ask for advice and rely on and talk to. So one of the folks that I called was this guy Chris Kuhl, who lived in Berlin, and I could sit considered him to be a friend and asked him for advice, and he thought for a bit. He chatted around, we chatted around the topic, and he said, "Yeah, I guess you could come and work with us here at Kinvolk." So that's what I did. I got on the plane, came over to Berlin, moved to Berlin. We got into, Kinvolk had a range of cloud-native projects. We had a flat car container Linux, which was just taking over from the original Core OS container Linux. Really exciting point that was happening, talking about confluence of things coming together with everything that was happening with on the Red Hat side, and we were building a lot of community, and I really liked that. We had conferences like Cloud Native Reject, All Systems Go, Berlin Cloud Native Meetup. So community and building that collaboration was really important in the Kinvolk team. So that was what appealed to me. I really enjoyed that. But I'm in Berlin. Still, after 3 years, people say to me, California, isn't that the dream? Like, how can you, how can you move from the Bay Area back to Germany? And to those people, it's like, yes, the Golden Gate Bridge at sunset is pretty nice, but you've probably never experienced the beauty of Kotti. Our office is just there through this. Just back here through the tunnel. So this is what I get every day. I mean, this gets me up in the morning. Beautiful story, right? Not quite over, because as I said, one of the things we did, building community, building partnerships. We did a lot of work very closely with Microsoft, and that led to last year, actually joining Microsoft and becoming part of that team, and part of my job is to still think about, how do we continue to simplify that cloud-native user experience, improve managed Kubernetes services, all of that. And something I bear in mind, and I wanted to kind of pull out from some of these experiences, is the importance of simplicity, right? I talked about this in the early Calico story. It's the same with Docker. That's really simple user experience. It's the same with Kubernetes. Right, so there's what I call a technological dialectic. I mean, we're in Germany. You've all read Hegel, I'm sure. So you all understand the concept of a dialectic. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis, etc. Right. So this is a pattern that happens over and over again. We have some complex technology that people are tearing their hair out over. Someone comes up with a super simple alternative or idea for solving these problems. Over time, it gets more bells and whistles added to it, gets more and more complex. And now we've got a new complexity problem, and someone comes up with another simple thing that's going to solve all of those complex things. If you look at Calico, we added overlay networking, we added complex policy models, all sorts of things. It's a much more complicated thing today to go deploy a Calico network than it was with the very first release. Doesn't mean it's not good technology. That is just the inexorable development of technology. But as an entrepreneur or as someone trying to introduce new technology, I would say your job is the continual fight against that complexity or entropy in the system. So if we look ahead, what is going to happen? What are the new ideas? Where are they going to come from? I would say start from the question of where is there complexity in the system today? Right, that is just crying out for simplification, and I don't have the answers. If I did, I wouldn't be spending my time here talking to you. This is, I'd be out building it. But I do see complexity in the system. Kubernetes itself has become infinitely configurable and flexible, and yes, people are solving this. There are distros and there are installers and there are Helm charts and people are working on this, but it's still an area of complexity that people are dealing with. And maybe because I work for a big cloud vendor, my perspective is slightly biased, but my view is this just gets solved by managed Kubernetes services having guardrails and making it the default options and all of that. But I'm sure other people have answers there. The ecosystem, there are so many projects. I mean, how do you possibly, as a new person coming into cloud native, know which projects you're going to build on? Security, yeah, I mean, this is just infinitely complex in multiple dimensions, the platform, the secure supply chain, et cetera, we're all going to be working on this. I suspect this is something where it just is going to be complex and is always going to be complex. But I don't know. I know people are out there trying to solve problems there. Geographic diversity is an interesting one as well. Kubernetes fundamentally relies on etcd. There's only so far you can stretch an etcd cluster and have it continue to work. You can't build a global scale Kubernetes cluster. But applications require global mobility today. So how do you simplify that? Observability data. We're getting so much data now out of our deployments. Things like eBPF tools, which surface just infinite amounts of data out of the system, out of the kernel. How do you process that? And my expectation is that this is an AI ML problem, and people talk about ML ops already. You'll have the computers listening to all the data and making their inferences from it. The dev experience. What's it like for a developer working with Kubernetes and containers today? What's that deployment pipeline like? And I love this tweet from Chris I just saw yesterday. Your YAML pipeline is no less brittle than bash scripts, right? We don't really have the right tools yet for a seamless experience that takes you from editing code through to deployment, and with all of those steps being super simple. Last point, data gravity and sovereignty. And we see this in Germany, obviously, at the forefront of a lot of this. Within the EU, you have regimes around the world are regulating, say, data must be in our region. But you have this problem of data gravity where data naturally pulls together other data sources and wants to be combined with it. So how do you simplify the management of all of this data, respecting regulatory boundaries and data protection rules and things like that? So these are some areas, but I am definitely not the expert here. And I would say coming to places like this is where you're going to find out the answers, and you're going to find out, talking to people out there in the break, what are your problems? Where are you seeing complexity? How can we solve those problems? And so that's why these kind of things are great. Connect, ask them, brainstorm solutions. So as you go out and build the future, I realize that was a bit of a ramble, kind of, and a little bit of a personal history. Thank you for indulging me. But to summarize, like, if you want the abstract learnings from this, really it's about innovation and understanding the scope of innovation. It's not about having some incredible genius invention. It's about how you take a fortuitous confluence of new technologies that are available at the right time for the market and make them easy to use and take them out to market. And that's simplicity, right? Embrace this dialectic. Realize that the thing that was simple 5 years ago is probably not simple today. There's going to be a new simple thing. That'll get more complicated. It just is the nature of things. Embrace the rejection. People telling you you're crazy is sometimes a good thing. Sometimes. Serendipity, the timing. Keep an eye out on what are the trends, what are the new things that are happening, what are the people talking about, and of course, you'll get that out of being part of the community, being active, making friends, lift up others, invest in that. It will pay back at some point in the future. I can't tell you when, but when you invest in community supports you as well. And last point here, which I'll mention, is this is one of the Kinvolk like foundational cultural points that we had: collaboration over competition. Yeah, sure, there are companies out there you can compete with, but it's a whole lot more fun to collaborate. And it's a whole lot more fun to take open source solutions and build on them and work with people that are potentially competing in the market, but find the areas where you can collaborate and focus on that. So anyway, those are the lessons that I drew from my 56 dog years now in the cloud native space. Hopefully they help you as you go build the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, for taking us through that 56-year journey, something as a thank you. I think we'll be playing a lot of card games later today during the after party.
Excellent.
I think we do have time for a question. I'll go on Slido. This is an interesting one, not to be divisive. Why do you, as a Microsoft employee, use a MacBook?
Well, there's a lot of folks in Microsoft use MacBooks. We choose whatever we feel like. Actually, this one this is what I had at Kinvolk, and I inherited that. But we have people use all sorts of technologies. I mean, Windows is a great desktop environment. So's Mac. So's Linux.
Yeah.
Personal preference.
Yeah. My understanding is it's GCP also have a lot of GCP engineers use MacBooks as well.
Yeah, but I guess they do have Chromebooks as well. Yeah.
But cool. Thanks. That was the only question we had.
Okay.
I think we wanted to see how divisive that question could be.
Yeah.
But answered perfectly. You will be around today?
I will, yes.
So do grab hold of Andrew and ask him about his history within Cloud Native. We do have a half-hour break now, a little bit longer. Don't forget to go and visit all of our sponsors. Without them, we would not be able to do this conference. Again, thanks, Andrew.
Thank you, Tim.